Jessica Evans sat at her desk, the glow from her computer screen illuminating the dark office. It was nearly 8 p.m., and the rest of her coworkers had long since gone home. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she typed up the final report for the day, trying to meet yet another unreasonable deadline. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes, feeling the strain. Jessica had been with Prime Solutions, a prestigious consulting firm, for 3 years. She was known as one of the best financial analysts on the team, her expertise integral to the company's biggest projects. The current deal on the table was a multi-million-dollar merger between two major tech companies, and she was the lead analyst. She glanced at her phone and saw a message from her boyfriend, Mark. "Dinner tonight? Haven't seen you all week." Jessica sighed. She wanted to go, but the towering pile of work made it impossible. She started typing her response, something about how she was swamped, when her phone buzzed again. This time it was her boss, Mr. Taylor. "Need those reports by morning. Big day tomorrow." Jessica groaned, tossing her phone aside. It wasn't the first time he'd sent such a message. She was used to working late, but lately the hours had become unbearable. And worse, there was no extra compensation, no overtime pay, nothing. Mr. Taylor was known for his sharp suits and sharper tongue. His reputation as a hard-driving executive had made Prime Solutions what it was today, but that success had come at the cost of his employees' well-being. Jessica had heard horror stories from other colleagues, many of whom had burned out after working with him for too long, yet she had always managed to stay ahead until now. The sound of approaching footsteps made her tense. She looked up as Mr. Taylor entered the room, his expression businesslike. "Jessica, still here? That's the kind of commitment I like to see," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jessica forced a smile of her own. "Just finishing up the reports for tomorrow." "Good, good," Mr. Taylor replied, leaning against the edge of her desk. "This merger is the biggest deal we've had in years. If we pull this off, it'll be a major win for everyone." Jessica nodded, but she couldn't help feeling the weight of his words. She was instrumental to the deal, and he knew it. "I've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately," she began carefully. "I wanted to talk to you about the possibility of overtime pay or maybe some time off once the deal's done." Mr. Taylor's smile tightened. "Jessica, you know how this works. This is a team effort. We're all making sacrifices right now to get this deal over the finish line. Besides, the experience alone will pay off in the long run. A few late nights won't hurt." Jessica bit her lip. It wasn't just a few late nights, it was every night. Later that night, Jessica sat alone in the office. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't focus. The words from her earlier conversation with Mr. Taylor echoed in her mind. She had been working overtime for months, all without extra pay. The promise of experience didn't pay the bills, and it certainly didn't give her back the time she had lost. She glanced at the clock. 9:30 p.m. Mark's text from earlier still sat unanswered. She knew he was disappointed, but she couldn't pull away from the work. If she left now, Mr. Taylor would consider her uncommitted, replaceable even. But was it worth it? The next day, Jessica dragged herself into work, exhausted from another sleepless night spent finishing the reports. Her phone buzzed. Mark again. This time it was a picture of an empty table at a restaurant, the one where they'd had their first date. Beneath it was a message. "I miss you. When can we get back to this?" Her heart sank. They hadn't gone out in weeks. Every time she promised to make time, work got in the way. It wasn't just Mark, either. Jessica hadn't spoken to her parents in months. Friends? They had given up on inviting her to things altogether. Her life had become nothing but work. At lunch, she bumped into Lisa, a former colleague who had left the company a year ago. They sat at a cafe, catching up, and Jessica found herself unloading her frustrations. It feels like my life isn't my own anymore," Jessica said, stirring her coffee. "I'm always here, working on this never-ending project. No compensation, no recognition, just more and more demands." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "That's why I left. Taylor doesn't care about us. He cares about the bottom line. And as long as you keep doing the work without asking for more, he's going to keep piling it on." Jessica knew Lisa was right. But the thought of leaving made her anxious. She had put so much into this job. What if leaving meant losing everything she had worked for? That evening, back in the office, Mr. Taylor called Jessica into his office. She had just finished another 12-hour day, but apparently it wasn't enough. "We need you to stay late tonight," Mr. Taylor said, not even looking up from his computer. Jessica blinked. "Tonight? I've already been here since 7 a.m. This merger is at a critical stage, Jessica. We can't afford any mistakes. You're the only one who knows the ins and outs of the financials. Stay a few more hours and we'll make sure everything is perfect." Jessica felt a surge of frustration. She was already running on fumes, and now he wanted more? "Mr. Taylor, I can't keep doing this. I need to be compensated for the extra time I'm putting in." Mr. Taylor finally looked up, his expression hard. "You're not the only one putting in extra time, Jessica. We're all making sacrifices here. If you can't handle it, maybe this isn't the right place for you." The words hit her like a slap. Maybe this isn't the right place for you. After all she had done for the company, this was his response? She had given up her personal life, her health, and her happiness for this job, and he didn't even care. Something inside Jessica snapped. "I think you're right, Mr. Taylor," she said, standing up. "Maybe this isn't the right place for me." Mr. Taylor looked confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I quit." The words felt like a weight lifted from her chest. "I've had enough of this." Mr. Taylor's face turned red. "Jessica, be reasonable. You can't just leave. We're in the middle of a deal and you're the only one who understands the financials. Without you, this deal could fall apart." Jessica smiled. For the first time in months, she felt in control. "Then maybe you should have treated me better." With that, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Mr. Taylor speechless. For the next few days, Jessica didn't look back. She spent time with Mark, reconnected with her family, and caught up on much-needed rest. It felt strange at first, having free time, not being tethered to her phone. But it felt good, too. Liberating. Then the calls started coming in. Mr. Taylor left message after message, each one sounding more desperate than the last. "Jessica, we need you back. The deal is falling apart without your input. Jessica, we're willing to discuss compensation. Let's work something out." Jessica listened to each message, but she didn't respond. She knew her worth now, and it was more than just a salary. It was her time, her energy, her life. After a week of silence, Jessica finally agreed to meet with Mr. Taylor. They sat across from each other in a boardroom, but this time the power dynamic had shifted. "We're prepared to offer you a substantial raise," Mr. Taylor began, his tone placating. "And a bonus for the extra hours you've worked." Jessica shook her head. "It's not just about money, Mr. Taylor. I'm not coming back unless I get full control of my schedule, compensation for all unpaid overtime, and a written contract guaranteeing work-life balance." Mr. Taylor looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "That's quite a lot to ask." "It's what I'm worth," Jessica replied, standing her ground. There was a long pause, but eventually Mr. Taylor nodded. "Fine, you've got a deal." As Jessica left the boardroom, she felt a sense of victory. She had stood up for herself, and in the process, she had regained control of her life. Walking out of the building for the last time, Jessica smiled. She knew this wasn't the end of her career. It was just the beginning of something better.